will never forgive Donald Trump, mainly because about 2 months ago, I found my first gray hair, and I am 1,001% convinced it's because the stress of him being in office. Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross. I'm very excited today because I have Debbie Cox Bultan with me, who is the CEO of NewDEAL Leaders, which is a very interesting organization that tries to advocate for a lot of Democratic elected officials at the state and local level. Debbie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to join you.
Today is going to be a little bit different, not necessarily talking about the news, but talking about, and I've been trying to think of like the best way to say this in the most respectful manner. And what I can come up with is, what the fuck is going on with the Democratic Party?
All right, fair enough. That's a way to dive in. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's my respectful language, truly. But before we dive in, what are we drinking? And then I'm going to ask you my favorite question.
Okay.
What do you have to say?
I am drinking today my favorite, which is really honestly my favorite drink, which is an Arnold Palmer. Heavy on the iced tea.
Yes, the best. Just a little splash of lemonade.
Little splash of lemonade. That's my drink. That's my drink.
Okay.
What are you drinking?
So I was like, we're going to be talking some heavy truths here. So I'm drinking a beer called The Truth.
I like it, actually. That's good.
Yeah, felt right. All right, let's do it. Cheers.
On brand. Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. Okay, so question I always love to ask is, why should we trust what you have to say?
I love that you asked that question. And I don't know that people should trust what I have to say, but people hopefully will want to listen to what I have to say. And I actually think that we'll come back to the word listen a lot in this conversation, probably because I think it's part of what the Democratic Party needs to do. So, but maybe the inherent in your question is, who am I and what do I do for a living? So that people might think that this is important, which is, so I am, as you mentioned, the CEO of the New Deal. We're a national network of state and local elected officials, Democrats around the country that we support, that we go out and find these really exceptional, pragmatic leaders and try to both help them govern where they live, but then to also elevate their voices into the national debate. I'm the founding CEO. I've been doing this for 15 years, talk to these folks all the time. And then before that, spent 15 years at a group called the Democratic Leadership Council, which was around, as people might remember, when Bill Clinton was running for president, that was his home. And so the last time the Democratic Party was kind of in a little bit of a conversation about how to redefine itself in a way that would make it more successful electorally. We'd lost 49 of 50 states when the DLC was founded. They helped bring the party back to a place that it was successful again. So both of those experiences, I feel like, are kind of relevant to the conversation.
Absolutely. So does NewDEAL Leaders, does financial support to try to elevate these leaders up into the national debate?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, so we're kind of unique in that way. We're not an electoral or a campaign organization. So we work on the governing side of the house. We work with leaders. We go out and find them. These are mayors, state legislators, city council members, even statewide office holders, lieutenant governors, attorneys generals. And we keep our group at about 200, 250 at any given time. So we go out and find this really exceptional group of leaders. We have a couple new classes a year. They're people who are really pragmatic, who are governing successfully where they live, and importantly, we're people that we think are going to rise and be the future leaders of the party and the country. And so that's one of the kind of criteria that we vet for. And so people, we've been doing this, as I said, for 15 years. We've had people like Pete Buttigieg, Governor Shapiro, Governor Stein, Governor Meyer, and Matt Meyer in Delaware, 18 members of the U.S. House, now 3 U.S. senators. So we have, over 15 years, had a lot of people, found those people when they were the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and worked with them to not just to help them find ideas from their peers around the country, which we do, but also to elevate their ideas and their voices.
Very cool. You have a good track record.
We've got some really good people. And I should just say, since you asked the question, I should say that we did just announce a partnership in the last few weeks with a group called The Next 50, which is also focused on state and local leaders below the age of 50 who are running for office. And so we're partnering with them now so that we can really support people in their whole life cycle as a candidate to elected officials. So we'll continue to do what we do, but we support them as they're governing. Then once the next 50 is identifying them, or even we'll endorse or give money to some of the New Deal leaders as they're running for higher office. And then once they're governing, they'll come back to New Deal. So that's an exciting partnership for us. I think it's a group, but together we really help support them, as I said, from candidate to governing.
Absolutely. That's in it. So we're going to talk about the whole new age versus, established in a bit. But I would just love to get your read on where things are at, how you think the Democrat Party is doing. What are your thoughts?
So it's really interesting because I actually think that, as funny as it is, like that's a question that's happening right now in the Democratic Party. Are we in trouble or are we not in trouble, right? And so I think that that's a fascinating conversation, frankly. I come down on the side of, yes, this was a relatively close election, but at the same time, we lost ground in pretty much almost all 50 states, pretty much across demographics. So I think this is more than just hey, if we had just done these few little things. I think this was a pretty big loss for us, and one that requires us to go back and really think about what voters were trying to tell us, and to do something different going forward. So to me, I feel like where Democrats are is we're at a place, goes back to that listening question at the very beginning, which is, I think that Democrats really need to be listening to a lot of people that said, looked at frankly their choices and, Donald Trump, we lost to Donald Trump. If we lost to Donald Trump, they really said something that they did not like something we were selling. And we've got to figure out what that is. And I've got ideas about that, but I think that's where the party is it's in a rebuilding time. It's in not a rebuilding time. I want to rephrase that because as somebody who works at the state and local level, our problem is not that we don't have great people, that we don't have a great bench, that we don't even have some great people in Congress. It's really that we've got to be talking to people and connecting with people in a way, and really delivering for people in a way that they feel that they actually think that we are delivering for them. I think that for too long, Democrats got on the side of defending essentially kind of systems that weren't working, that were defending government that wasn't working, and we have to actually. It's frustrating to watch what's happening with DOGE right now because Democrats, as you know, for a long time, were the party of kind of reforming government to make it work better. Think back to Al Gore's reinventing government back in the day. This should have been a Democratic issue. Instead, we were defending what wasn't working. We weren't fixing it fast enough. We weren't making it delivered for people. Prices were too high. And essentially, they got a group to come in and say, we're going to, fix government from people who do not want to fix government. All they want to burn it to the ground and make it go away. And that's not, I don't think, what the American people want.
It's so interesting, right? Because when I know there's been research and studies that show, and, even results, when you put down on the ballot what is generally aligned as liberal and democratic principles, it wins with flying colors. But once you put that D or the R next to the name, very different story, right? Democrats, in my personal belief, have a severe messaging problem. They've had a messaging problem for a while. And I think this election is just further proof of that. But it is kind of disheartening to see what feels like still such a struggle, of trying to get footing, especially on a national level. And I mean, you have your ear on the ground much more than I do. I mean, are things as much as a mess as they appear from the outside?
I mean, I think there are. I think there's a lot of opportunities for Democrats right now, actually. And if we look back to the 2024 election, what we're talking about and why are Democrats in a mess and why, what do we have to do differently? It's because we lost the presidential, right? And we're in this mess with President Trump being elected.
Presidential and House and Congress.
And sorry, yeah, that's right. Federal. Sorry, I meant full sweep on the federal level, right? At the federal level. Sorry, you're absolutely right. And so when I'm looking at what's happening at the state and local level, and even some of our folks who made the jump from state legislature to Congress, right? I'm looking at a lot of New Deal leaders outperform the top of the ticket, and so we did a post-election analysis after November to say why was that? What did people do differently? And even some tough states like Krista McDonald-Rivet in Michigan and Janelle Bynum in Oregon, just to name two. People who did much better than the top of the ticket. Why was that? And so we talked to them, and the answers were they really they were so connected to their constituents, right? They had relationships with their constituents. They were focusing on issues that people cared about, namely bread and butter, kitchen table economic issues, the cost of living, high prices, housing, all the above. And also, they were able to inoculate themselves from some of the charges that did get hurled at Democrats because people knew them, and they'd say, "Oh, that might be what the Democratic Party stands for, but that's not what Kristen stands for. That's not what I know Janelle. That's not, Janelle works across the aisle. Janelle comes to, places where we live and talks to us in a way that, that makes sense to me." And so I think there's a real disconnect from the national party, I do believe, to people that we're not seeing at the more on the ground. And I think so for me, we've got to learn from those people who are running ahead of the national party and figure out, what to do that they're doing that's working well.
Right. What I find interesting, though, is that, for a prior job of mine, like I've been at the Trump rally, I've spoken with plenty of Trump supporters, right? No one and I feel like a lot of the Democratic messaging is all like, we're the party of the people, right? We're for the working class. Yet when you saw at the DNC or the the convention, right? You have all these celebrities that are advocating, right, for voting for, once was Point Biden, then Kamala Harris, right? And it feels like bullshit. You're like, why am I seeing these people worth billions of dollars telling me to vote for someone that has also been part of the establishment for so long, right? Whereas Trump, whether or not he's part of the establishment or not is a completely different conversation, but has portrayed himself as such an outsider that people don't care that he's not really for the people because they think he has the money. He's just going to fight for us, right? The truth is obviously a very different story. But how do Democrats get back to actually being able to connect as the party of the people when it's been so far gone and is viewed as this like elitist establishment organization?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question. And I think you hit on a couple important points. One is that I think that the Trump did win because he continues to be seen as the outsider and the disruptor, right? It goes back to what I was talking about earlier about government not, people really kind of viscerally thinking that government's not delivering for them. And so they're just going to keep trying to do new things until something lands, right? But to your other point about, I like to say, what's that? Do you know what's the movie, Usual Suspects, the greatest, trick the devil ever pulled is saying she doesn't exist. I feel like the greatest trick Trump ever pulled is convincing people he's one of them, which is just like crazy to me, right? And so, but so why is that?
Not to stop you for a second, but yeah. I don't think he convinced people that he was one of them. I think he never tried to. And I think that's part of the reason why there was kind of this mass appeal is there wasn't that farce of I'm one of you. It was like, I'm not one of you. And so I'm going to fight for you because I don't have to, but this is what I want to do for you.
Or that he's going to be radically authentic, maybe, right? Is essentially
exactly.
Right. I mean, maybe radically authentic, and that's there's a lot of directions we could go with this question, but so much to say, so much to say. But I do think that there's a couple things. One is I think Democrats have gotten ourselves really bullocksed up. Is that a term? About
we make words on this podcast all the time.
Let's make that one. Just kind of balled up or whatever about not being able to. Trying to speak in a way that does feel inauthentic. Sometimes, I think actually Democrats historically, really do from our policy perspective, to your earlier point. If you look at our policies, if you look at who people trust on education, who people trust on childcare, who do you think, cares more about you, even to some extent. Democrats do really well, but when you look at the issues that they think that matter most to them, why they vote, things like the economy and immigration right now, Democrats are just getting creamed on, frankly. And so why is that? And I think that one thing we do tend to be a little too paternalistic, frankly. We have that in our language. We have this idea that we can take care of you, whereas I I don't think that's what people want to hear. Even the term, which is now kind of the term that we're all talking about is, how do we win back working people? I'm always like, who is I'm a working person. Aren't you a working person? I mean, W-2 employees, working people, but somehow when we say it as Democrats, it feels like what we mean is something is an other, right? Not me. I'm not working people, but whoever are these working people, we're here to fight for you. And so, I mean, I'm actually an advocate of like trying to almost do away with any adjective on front of people and just talk about people, right? I've had candidates say, well, if you don't want me to say working people, what do you want me to say? I'm like, I just want you to say people, I think, right? It's that I think that, and that is what Trump has been very good at, right? Trump has been very good at saying, you, we, whatever it is. That these folks are focused on people other than you. And so, and for too long, frankly, we also, we've not always been great about going to where people are, right? We've, had a long-term problem, not just in 24 with people in rural areas, right? We've been, we've had a strategy some too often where we're trying to run up the numbers in blue cities or where people agree with us. And we have not been as great, I don't think, as going out to talk to people where they live. I mean, there's exceptions to this. I think Pete Buttigieg, who I mentioned earlier, is great at this. He's going on Fox all the time.
He's
right?
incredible. He's like the one person that's able to command respect in a room and meet everyone where they're at.
Yes.
No matter demographic. And I think he's like very, very special in that. And I think that's pretty rare.
I think but that's true. And he is who he is. And he's a phenomenal communicator. And, everyone can't be a Pete Buttigieg level communicator, but people can take lessons from him about, again, showing up on Fox, showing up in places where, and Bill Clinton was good at this too, right? Showing up where people don't always agree with you and finding a way to talk about things. If people didn't agree with you, that didn't make them feel like you thought that they were idiots or racists or whatever it was. To be able to say, right, there's a Clinton example, right, of when he would talk about abortion and talking about it being legal, safe, and rare. That's not how activists on abortion, and I'm a staunchly pro-choice person, but that's not the language that activists use. And so, but by using that kind of different language and in a way that was authentic, that he believed, he made people think that, oh, maybe we have more in common here than I thought we did. And so, Democrats, we've gotten, frankly, to be honest, really pulled farther left by some of our some of our interest groups who want us to talk in ways that are geared toward a very small number of people. And what we've got to do is figure out how to broaden that language and how to broaden our appeal to people who don't always agree with us on every issue. We've gotten into these litmus tests, right? If you're not going to check this box on, defunding police or whatever it's going to be, you're not sufficiently, a Democrat. And that's a real problem for us in doing what we have to do because the math says so. As Democrats, there are more conservatives in this country than there are liberals. There just are. There have been for decades. So we have to not only hold our base, but we have to win a majority of independents to win any kind of national election. And so if we're not willing to talk to people that don't agree with everything that we say, we're never going to win elections. So that's where we've got to start, is how do you figure out how to talk to people who don't agree with us and say, you're part of this party too, you're part of this tent too.
And I totally understand, right, what you're saying. And I do think, sometimes get bogged down in kind of the logistics and the specific of certain things where it's like, you're talking about these issues that don't actually affect everyone's day to day, and that's, I think, one of the big reasons why Kamala lost and why Democrats got a full sweep is like, we focused on abortion issues and democracy.
That's right.
Abortion affects 50% of the population, and a fair amount of those, doesn't really impact anymore, right? Because they're post age to get pregnant or before the age to get pregnant and can't vote, right? It was not a majority amount of the population. And then democracy is not something that's tangible in any way, shape, or form.
I think a lot of us were heartened by 2020 and 22, where we saw, people who believed in big lies losing, particularly at the Secretary of State level and other places, and thinking democracy was a really salient issue. I think when you think about where people said they voted in it always comes back to the economy, right? It always comes back to how people are feeling. And so, so it's not even that they it's just that hierarchy of needs, right? If you're struggling to put food on the table, to pay your, rent, and to fill up your gas tank, and you're, and instead, and you don't hear the people you want to vote for talking about that as much as they're talking about, a threat to democracy, and you're not even sure exactly what that means. I think that's a problem for Democrats. It's not that we're not right. I mean, it's actually, I really believe the argument. It's just that that can't be the whole story, right? It's because that's not what people are struggling with every day to day. It really has to be about what they're struggling with.
And then it comes back to the whole, okay, well, Democrats have now become like an elitist party that says they're advocating for the working class, quotes on that, right? So
Right.
It's that hard conversation. But I do want to go back to the concept that you were saying about needing to be a little bit more moderate. Right. And there's such this divide within the Democratic Party now of I don't want to say new age progressives, because Bernie Sanders is, leading the charge on that, but progressives and then kind of more centrist moderates. Right. And you feel this clash, and seeing a lot of Democratic strategists come out and say we need to be more moderate and we need to be kind of reaching more towards the center right. But what I always come back to is 2016 election, when Bernie Sanders had all the support for being a progressive, and with the DNC and Hillary Clinton, whether you agree or not, and the logistics of it all, really, it kind of felt like it was swept away from him in not a super fair manner, right? And I see a lot of comparisons in Trump and Bernie Sanders of being the outsider. And that's what I think people want, because people are anti-establishment for better or for worse. That's just where we're at nowadays. Could you elaborate more on your thinking about that?
Yeah. I guess what I would say about that is that if you look at the Democrats who have won elections, right, national elections, we're thinking about, in a general election, right? You're thinking about Clinton, you're thinking about Obama, you're thinking about Biden, right? I think that those, I think that there is something to this idea that, again, I go back to my numbers, right? You could win a primary, with just support from the folks who would consider themselves farther left. That's really, but that's not where the whole country is. And so Democrats have to kind of find people who can do both things. I actually think there's a lot more that unites the Democratic Party than divides it, frankly. So, I think that there are things that, I think we're all really have kind of a similar bent around, we're Democrats because we believe that that everybody in America should have a fair shot, that everybody should be included, that everyone should have the opportunity to live their life to the fullest, right? That we believe in democracy, we believe in freedom, we believe in a government that works and, that can deliver for people. So, I think there's a lot of that. Then there becomes a real question about what's the appropriate right size and scale of government. I think that's where a lot of the fights within the Democratic Party, frankly, land, which is, should the government be in charge of doing everything, or should government really be about setting expectations and setting goals and allowing a lot of flexibility on how to get there? We're going to get kind of nerdy on the policy here for a second, right? But so when you think about things like, I think that there's things like the Green New Deal or Medicaid for all, where, there's some splits within the party. And I would say that, I would be on more of a center left view of saying that I don't think government can solve every problem. Government's role is to, like I said, is to kind of set the goals, and bring people along to try to meet them. It can't kind of be a top down thing. So I think that there, but then there's some other things, like I talked about defund police. There's some things that, I think that a small number of people in our party believe that is actually not very representative of the party at all. And so one of my goals is to elevate these leaders across the country who are solving problems, who are making government work, and to have them be the face of the Democratic Party. Because I think that that's really, to me, it feels like where Democrats have a problem is that it kind of goes back to what you were talking about. It's like, but that we mean well, but that we can't deliver, right? And so, and let's take another example. Joe Biden did a phenomenal job of getting us out of the COVID era and, and stabilizing the economy, and had a lot to point to on what he got through Congress. But a lot of that was on the input side, not the output side, right? So a lot of what was done was we passed these big pieces of legislation that came with a lot of dollars, but the implementation of those really fell down because there were, we're still trying to figure out how to get all the broadband money deployed so that people can actually get connected to the internet. And part of that's because progressives, there's a big movement right now. You may have heard of the abundance movement, or, just to say a couple people that I work closely with, Jen Pahlka, who wrote Recoding America, and Mark Dunkelman has a book out called Why Nothing Works. And, this idea that Democrats and progressives have gotten in our own way about government not working because we put up so many barriers. So it's like, okay, we want everything to be perfect. We want to say, okay, you have to use union labor, you have to pay a prevailing wage, you have to have everything made in America, and all of those may be individually and you have to have a public comment section where one person might be able to derail something because they don't like it. So we've put out, public comment seems like a good thing. We should want consensus, whatever. But all of those individually, if you stack them all up together, just means that progress comes to a halt. And so I think Democrats, particularly in the middle of all this DOGE stuff, where DOGE is again, in the name of government efficiency, but really is about tearing government down, have an opportunity for us to show a different way forward. That's just what does the government look like that actually delivers for people? And how do we take, regulations off the books? How do we streamline things? How do we make sure we're focused on, outputs, not inputs? All those things I think that has to be the path forward for Democrats.
What about the concept of healthcare for all? I feel like that's something that a lot of people can get behind, and that has shown a lot of support. Well, why does it feel like the party's shied away from that?
I think that's a great example, actually, of where there's probably real unanimity within the party that healthcare should be a right. I think I think from center left to far left, I think that's probably something that everybody agrees with. There's probably some questions about how to deliver it, right, and whether there's a private market. Obama, of course, had his own Obamacare, which was not a fully government solution that we supported. So I think that's a great example of something where there's probably a lot of support around an idea and a goal, and then less maybe total agreement within the party about how to get there.
So you kind of brought this up at the beginning, right? Talking about age, right? And, new blood.
Yeah.
Government needs some fresh blood.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting is David Hogg, who is the vice president of DNC now, just announced that I think he's working with an organization outside the DNC. I think $20 million are going in to unseat established Democrats and Democratic strongholds and try to get some fresh Democratic blood in.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I find it really confusing, to be honest with you. So I know David a little bit. I've always really appreciated him as an activist, and the work he did around gun safety legislation after Parkland is amazing. So this particular project, which I find curious because he's vice chair of the DNC, as you mentioned, so that seems really counterintuitive to running people against each other in the same party. But I think that the thing that makes me nervous about what he's doing is, frankly, so he's targeting only deep blue states and looking to knock off people who are holding those seats. If we're going to win, we actually have to go out and win districts that are harder to win, right? So actually the whole point about trying to win back the House, for example, in 26, which is going to be job number one for all Democrats, should be, of course, is that we've got to actually go out and win districts that are currently literally by definition not being held by Democrats. And so to spend the money on, flipping, knocking off incumbents with new folks really kind of baffles me, to be honest with you. I think that we all need to be focused on flipping those districts that we can flip to gain back a majority. I also feel like what he has said is his kind of two criteria are young and then people need to be fighters. So let's take them one at a time. So young, look, I run an organization that's all about building a bench. And so I'm absolutely believe that we've got to have more young people in politics. We've got to have all kinds of voices in politics. I don't think that I don't know that there's I like to say the older I get, the more the number comes up in my own head, right? Oh, this means young, but
Yeah, right.
suddenly 50 sounds really, it's fine. That's young. But, but I definitely do believe, I'd like to tell this story that we had a New Deal leader who's no longer in office now, but who was the youngest state senator in Connecticut, Will Haskell, who's phenomenal. When he was a New Deal leader, when he was in the legislature, and we have a podcast called An Honorable Profession, and I interviewed him for the podcast, and he told me that he was the only person in his state senate that had either was a renter, only one in the whole state senate, and the only person who'd ever, this is not as surprising, the only person who'd been like through active shooter drills, right, as a child. So you can see why his perspective in that body is super important, right? You've got, if you're talking to people who are only homeowners, like, and everyone is struggling to rent, like, so I think that, so I absolutely believe we need new blood and fresh blood. I think that it is, or young perspectives, I guess I should say. I think it's a little arbitrary of like, what does that mean and what's the right age? And, like I mentioned those two examples earlier of Kristen and Janelle, who are new stars in the House, they've got older kids, they're not Gen Zers, let's say that, but I think that they bring a fresh perspective. So I think we should be careful about that. And then on the fighter issue, I think that this is a really interesting conversation because inherent in your very first question to me about like what's going on with Democrats, I think another question is on everybody's mind is like how best to fight back. I don't think there's any Democrat right. I don't think that there's any Democrat that believes that that we should not be fighting back, that we should not be standing up for some of the abuses that are happening, what's happening with our eroding of the Constitution. But I think that there's real debate on what that looks like and whether we can fight everything, and if not, what are the issues we should be fighting on. And so those are real conversations happening in the party. And so the other thing I would just say about his effort is contrasted to say what I'm focused on is I think what we look for when we go out and find new dealers is people who are delivering for their constituents where they live. And so I think that because to me we have to be equal parts fighting and putting forth an alternative that people can vote for. And so I think only focusing on kind of the fighting part is like half the job, frankly.
Let's talk about the fighting part because that's interesting. It's pretty disappointing.
Which part?
Oh, wow. Yeah. How much more time do we have? It's like, it feels as though Republicans have, it's like a race, right? And the Republicans have gotten a 20-second head start, and the Dems are just figuring out how to read what the instructions are. And that's what it feels like from the outside, right? We had Cory Booker do his like wonderful speech, right? 25 hours, which is like groundbreaking in multiple different ways. But then what happened? Nothing. You have Chris Van Hollen, senator from Maryland, go down to El Salvador to see Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Kilmar's still in jail. So you have, and like there's this new like 4 different representatives that just went down to El Salvador to like see what things are happening, right? This has been going on for 6 weeks already. It's like, it's infuriating from an outside just to feel like nothing. Like, where is the urgency? And also just like, Democrats have kind of taken always the nice side of things. And I think kind of some people are tired of that, like you have Jasmine Crockett out there, like, listen, I agree. I like 90% of the stuff she says, but sometimes she really pushes the limit, right? But I think people are excited to see someone that's doing the same thing that the Repubs do to the Dems.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your, where's the motivation?
Yeah, it's really interesting and I think it's a super important question. And because I feel like figuring out what fighting looks like, particularly for center left folks is really like a really important question, right? Because, but let's be super clear, like we don't control any lever of power in Washington right now. So like when you say like, but he's not home, it's like, so, like we can't, right? Democrats literally do not have, the House, the Senate, the executive branch to pull any levers like that, right? So what we can do is we can shine light, we can file lawsuits, we can so I think that that's a kind of an interesting thing for people to just remember, to understand, right? That so when we start talking about the 2026 elections and the House elections and how important it is that Democrats take back a House in Congress, it's like critical, right, to have some kind of foothold to be able to push back. But with that said, I don't get any sense there's not a sense of urgency, and I think that I really do understand people's frustrations. It's like what we want it now. We want where are the results right now? I'm really heartened to see all the protests, and particularly the protests that are happening in, it's wonderful they're happening all over the country, but the protests that are happening in red states, in Republican districts, the town halls, where, as I was listening to Amy Klobuchar over the weekend talk about her tour around Minnesota, and she was like, it's great that we've got such big crowds in the big cities, but I'm going to these little tiny towns and farmers are showing up who've never who've never come to something before and saying, I voted for Donald Trump and I didn't know this is not what I signed up for. I'm worried about the tariffs and what they're going to do to my farm, right? All those things. So I think that, again, I think we just have to be super careful that we know who we're talking to and what, because we're as Democrats, we can get really riled up talking to each other. And part of our challenge is to have that sense of urgency, which I really think Democrats do across the board. I really do. But, but also to recognize that what's the task here? The task is to win some people over and who can vote for us next time that didn't vote for us last time. And that's a little bit different than just riling up the base, right? And so I think that is an important thing for us to think about going forward. I was really hard, and I live in California. I mean, I love Gavin's lawsuit on the tariffs. I think that's a really important thing that just happened recently. And so, we've got to continue to call out and put pressure on the administration where they're doing, clearly illegal and unconstitutional things. And I think we've got to be really smart about what we fight on. I mean, I think that's part of the challenge. And I think it's by design. It is like there's something new every hour. And so, that's why it gets a little bit frustrating to kind of figure out what the right thing to fight on is, because again, let's always look at that from a lens of, what's right? We've got to figure out what's, the work that's happening in El Salvador right now is not just good politics. It's the right thing to do, right? We've got people who have not been afforded their due process, and that's a cornerstone of our democracy and our rule of law, and we've got to fight on that. But, let's take another example for a second, like USAID, which pains me and breaks my heart because I know how important that money is to both, what's happening to people around the world, but also to our own security and safety and as Americans. But, that is a deeply unpopular program, agency in the United States. And so is that what we take a stand on? Or do we say, okay, our job number one is to get back in power, and then we will do an education campaign on why USAID is important and why it should be funded? But if that's where we spend our energy, that is going to tell that. I think that a lot of people in this country are going to be like, yeah, that's exactly why I voted for that guy. I don't want to send my money overseas, right? And so I think we just have to be super smart, frankly, and strategic, which can be frustrating because, of course, all of us are like, but that's super important. And it is super important, but it's, it is really just figuring out where to devote your time and energy, and is part of the challenge when you've got stuff coming at you literally 20 times a day, right? Can I tell you, I told my staff when back in December, because I have a lot of young staff, and I was like, okay, listen, I've been through this before. This is what it's going to look like. He's going to say some crazy stuff. We're going to have to do, and then I had to come back at a weekend. I was like, okay, everything I said, this is totally different. So just forget anything I said before and we're going to start fresh.
You're like, we haven't seen this before. This is insane.
We have not seen this before. This is not something
I personally will never forgive Donald Trump, mainly because about 2 months ago, I found my first gray hair, and I am 1,001% convinced it's because the stress of him being in office.
It's not my first, but I have many more than I did.
Many
I
more.
totally agree with that.
Like, it literally was the front of my head, and I have not found another one since, but I was just like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, I completely, it's right
You
though.
know?
I mean, and it's just, it
Yeah.
is so, heart-wrenching, right? It's scary and it's
Awful.
heart-wrenching and it is so, you just kind of every day wake up and you're just like, what, how did we get here? Right. But another thing I talk about when I think about like the, this place we find ourselves in and having to gear up for this fight. And sometimes I think, like, gosh, like, how did this happen? Like, this is so crazy. And then I actually think, I go back and think about the fact that really from like in our lifetimes, we had this really amazing period of peace and prosperity, actually, was actually somewhat unusual, right? Like in American history, right? After the Second World War, after even Watergate and all that, we had this kind of, so it's like, actually, if we look historically, upheaval, having to fight for our democracy, having to fight for people is actually kind of part of what Americans have had to do every generation. We just had a very kind of long term where that wasn't. So now this seems abnormal. I mean, Donald Trump is certainly abnormal. I'm not saying that, but but this idea that we have to gear up as citizens and engage. I do have a hopeful. Someone said optimism is not the right word because that's too passive. So hopeful is a better word. Belief that this is going to be a massive civic lessons for Americans, that hopefully people are going to understand what it means to stay engaged and be engaged. And that, and for me, actually talking about elected officials, people are like, oh, why would anybody want to run for office right now? I'm seeing people step up to run for office, not despite what's happening, but because of what's happening. And they feel like it's like their duty. And that gives me a ton of hope.
We'll wrap this up, but like the last question, I guess, is like, we've seen a lot of big protests happening and people that normally don't show up. How do Democrats capitalize on this moment? How do we fix the messaging problem?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to, I think it's both a messaging problem and an engagement problem, right? We've got to encourage people to stay engaged, right, in their local communities, whatever that looks like. We have to, we don't want people to feel like that, all they can do is go to a rally. I think that, there's plenty of opportunities for them to get connected with local candidates or to run for office themselves or to, whatever it is. So I think that there's an engagement piece. And then from a messaging piece, I think we just have to keep focused on what people care about and remember what people, and also be willing to listen to those people who don't agree with you. I'm going to kind of end where I started, because it's like, I do think that with the rallies, which I think are super important, but again, a lot of those people there are, people who you're going to look around the room and everyone's going to kind of think like you do. So like, let's make sure that in those conversations, we're saying, hey, who in your life does not agree with you? What are they saying? Are you really listening to them? Is there something we can bring to them that will, be appealing to them going forward? And I do think, again, there's these opportunities. I'm all for us. I mean, we have to do both, but there is an opportunity because Trump has, the administration is so incompetent, is so dangerous, whether it's on our civil liberties front or on the economic front, that there's an opportunity, I think, for us to go into to new people and say, come back with us, but we can't do it in a way that is, I told you so. I can't do it as a way of, see, I can't believe you voted for this person the first, the second time. It's like, all of that aside, you are welcome back here. Let's come together around things we agree on. And like, this is not a time, this is a time to really engage people in a deeply, gracious and kind of like honest way, right? Not a way that says, that feeds back into this, we were right and they were wrong kind of thing. It just can't be about we and them anymore. It has to be about all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I always say, it's like, I am very liberal and very progressive, and that's a lot of the people that I stay that like I'm friends with, and my family's all like that, right? And having been to like Trump rally and Nikki Haley events, when she was running as well, like I've had many, and I did deep canvassing work with people that are undecided, 2020 election, right?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends and a lot of family members that like scoff at my ability to be able to have conversations with people that I disagree with, which is so concerning to me. And the way that I always try to frame it, I'm like, listen, I was like, when it comes down to it, Democrats and Republicans, all people just fundamentally want the best for themselves and those they care about.
That's right.
The way that I interpret it, the circle is just bigger for Dems than it is for Republicans,
I think that's
and
right.
they're different just ways of getting there,
I think that
you
that's
know?
right.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of how I try to, you know, make it make sense, and because like we're all humans, you
Yes.
know, like we're all
Yes.
just trying to stay alive. It's difficult. We're all trying to
We're
do
all
it.
trying to stay alive, and it's okay that why did we decide that we have to agree on everything, right? I mean, why do we decide that if you don't agree, all of a sudden this means political violence, or this means, this is it's okay. I have friends, you have, partners or spouses or whatever that you don't agree with. Like, that's part of just being, human, as you said. And so I think that we've got to get back to a place where we can disagree in a way that, does not demean someone as that they are the enemy. And that, and look, Donald Trump is stoking that. I mean, it serves his purposes to stoke that. So, so we have to, I just happen to believe that the answer to that is not to, out Donald Trump. I just think that's impossible, frankly, actually. And so I think we have to find a way to reach out and to connect with people, on things that we all care about, as you said, and where they live,
Well,
Yeah.
Debbie, this has been such a great conversation.
Oh,
One of my
it was so much
favorites. I love
fun.
talking about this stuff. Good.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
having me. Yeah, it was
No,
really fun
thank
to
you
talk
so
to you.
much. Yeah. And I'm your host, Emily Gross. We'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.